welcome to the House of ZK Radio, which is a focused podcast and media channel exploring everything ZK, zero knowledge. I'm Alice, education lead at ZKM. Today I'm joined here with co-host Pavel, who's DevRel lead at ZKM, and our very special guest, Brecht, co-founder of Taiko. So thank you so much for being here today, Brecht. We are very, very excited to have you.
Yep. Hey everyone, and great to be here.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Brecht, if you could first start off with a brief introduction of yourself. So maybe your story on how you got involved in the Web3 space and also the ZK space.
Right. My journey started in 2017. So, I heard about Bitcoin, but I wasn't specifically interested in Bitcoin. But then I heard about Ethereum, and then I tried to kind of get into the Ethereum ecosystem. So I tried to find an excuse to kind of join, to kind of write smart contracts. And then I kind of learned about a couple of projects, and then made a very simple kind of proof of concept at the time in a couple of weeks, using LipSnark, which was at the time kind of one of the two things available. So you had LipSnark and you had Bellman, and they both were kind of meh. So you had to write R1 CS constraints manually, and it was pretty bad experience. But at the time it was kind of the best we had, so you did it anyway. And so there was also some work already being done by Barry Whitehead and Harry R, kind of making these tools that at least make it possible to write this even if you weren't a cryptographer. So there was things Merkle tree stuff and some kind of hashing functions already available, signatures as well. You had all the ingredients were there to kind of make a ZK rollup, and that's kind of what we did at ZK rollup. So started doing that at the end of 2018, and I guess it went quite well. And at the end of 2019, we were actually ready to kind of launch the rollup at Loopring. So I think that was kind of my start in ZK, and and also kind of designing kind of these things, which I really liked. And then did some more stuff at Loopring. We also did the partnership with GameStop was kind of a big thing with Loopring, and then started looking into more generalized ZK rollups. So for Looping, it was just transfer trades and stuff like that. So very application specific. And then started working together with the Ethereum Foundation on this ZKVM, this community ZKVM project. Worked on that for a couple of years, and then kind of quit Looping, joined the community Ethereum Foundation project, and then eventually joined Taiko with Daniel, also the founder of Loopring, and Terrence and Matthew, and then that's where we are now, Taiko.
Nice. I love the very diverse background that you have. So you first started off with a big gaming background, working as a gaming company, and then you got into the Ethereum ecosystem, and then you did some optimization bounties, and then you got into ZK Rollup. So really love the progression there. Sounds very interesting. But I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about the vision that you had when first joining Taiko and how it evolved to today, and also how that vision shapes with your current vision for Gwyneth.
Right. So for Taiko, I guess the main goal that we had was to make it a rollup that one as close as possible to Ethereum. So we at the start we tried to make it Ethereum equivalent, but at the time it was not taken for granted this was even possible because of all the things that are very expensive to do in ZK. But eventually kind of turned out right because the advances in ZK made it actually possible to do a fully Ethereum equivalent rollup. So we kind of lucked out there that we were very optimistic on the progress of ZK. And the other kind of thing was the decentralization aspect. So we tried to make a rollup that was as decentralized as possible as well, because the other rollups were not doing it. So that was kind of also a big reason to actually try to make it happen. So yeah, at the time, well, even looping was kind of like very like centralized, and then you had like other, well, I guess basically still the case with the other rollups, where they still have like a centralized sequencer. So we tried to like make a rollup where that wasn't the case. And at the beginning, it was actually wasn't clear like how to do this in the best way. So we had like a couple of different kind of like designs, and then eventually stumbled upon like well yeah, using L1 validators to kind of like also be able to propose blocks for Taiko, which well is kind of like an obvious way to do it, but it's not an obvious way why it's actually efficient to do it. And so yeah, which is currently kind of like a based rollup. So yeah, we currently really focus on like the base rollup because that's kind of like the most important thing now, because the Ethereum equivalents, so it's very difficult to do in ZK, but it's easier to do in like an optimistic rollup because you don't have to worry about like the optimization things. Yeah, I think those are the main ones. Yeah, I think those are the main ones.
Yeah, got it. And I'm wondering if you could also talk about the difference between Gwyneth and Taiko for anyone in our audience who is very
Right.
curious. And in what situations would, say, a developer choose to use Gwyneth over Taiko? And maybe you could talk about how they differ in things like their proving designs, their speeds, finality, just those kinds of factors.
Right. So I would say like Taiko is quite a traditional rollup compared to something like Gwyneth. So you have well, traditional rollup is kind of like how it's kind of like organized. So you have like normal, kind of like you have like a bridge, you have like a smart contract where like the blocks are proposed, and then like with some delay they are like proven, and yeah, that's kind of like in a very small nutshell, kind of like what Taiko is. So the main important thing there is that one kind of like the proving speed. So Taiko is kind of like designed to have like well direct finality when a block is proposed, but it takes into account that like proving speeds were still seen, especially for ZK, were seen as like very slow. So we took that into account like when designing Taiko, where like yeah, the proving speed did not matter as much. So it's only for like if you want to withdraw, then of course the proof needs to be there, but it doesn't matter that much if it takes like a couple of hours to do that. And also like for bridging, so we kind of like have like a pretty easy way to kind of like communicate with the L1 and L2. And it's also like the benefit there of being Ethereum equivalent is that our state root is the same. So if we want to read data from L1 on L2, or we want to read data from on L1 from L2, then we just have to use like a Merkle proof to be able to verify that some state was written somewhere. And so it's kind of like the same mechanism both ways, same data format. So that kind of like makes it easy, but still it's kind of like a traditional bridge. Like, okay, if you want to see that something happened on L2, you just, for example, a deposit, you kind of like have a special like bridge contract, and you kind of like, do the deposit there, like you write on L1 that you want to transfer like one ETH to like L2, and then on L2 you kind of like asynchronously read that okay something happened on L1. Now you kind of like read using a Merkle proof that this happened, and you kind of like get your money out on the L2 side. So yeah, that's kind of like bridging, the proving stuff. And so for Gwyneth, we try to make it possible to kind of like avoid doing kind of like a lot of stuff. So I guess that's kind of like, that's kind of like the thing. So you sort of try to like avoid having to do much work and having to kind of like spend all these costs and kind of like complexity to make these systems. So the one thing first is kind of like this asynchronous kind of like bridging that we do. So first to write something, then kind of like something needs to happen, and then you can read it on the other side. So we try to avoid that by having like this synchronous composability thing. So instead of having like this two-step process or even like three-step process for like security reasons, you can just say like, okay, I want to call something from L1 to L2, or like I do a call from L2 to L1, and then basically it just like happens like at the same time. So you don't have to really have kind of like a bridging infrastructure, because if you just want to do like the cross-chain communication, you just do a call to the other chain. And basically that's kind of like the bridge. So the bridging is kind of like embedded in the Gwyneth protocol, but in a very, very simple way because you just switch chains. So I think that's hopefully that kind of like explains how it works, but not in too much detail. Also, the other thing with like the proving is, instead of having like this delay between, okay, I'm proposing a block and only having later like the proof, that's also like something that kind of like introduces asynchronously in kind of like the system. And it also introduces like quite a lot of complexity because you have to like store stuff, and then you kind of like have to you do some like bookkeeping to kind of like make this work. So what we do on the proving side is also to just do, if you propose a block, you also kind of like have to immediately prove it. So there's like no kind of like also like two-step process there. So the well, first of all, this is all like, it removes quite a lot of complexity on the smart contract side. And second, of course, this gives also the synchronous composability. So that means that if you have the proof there immediately, then you can just, whatever you did on L2, you immediately know it's correct. So you can also directly use the information from L2 on the L1 to directly act upon. So that means that something, if you want to withdraw, for example, 1 ETH, you did it in the L2 block. If you directly prove it, that means you can also immediately get your 1 ETH out. So you can go, that means that in this whole system, you can actually go from L1 to L2 to L1 again, and again to L2 and L1 immediately, and do whatever needs to be done. And so people don't have to wait for withdrawals, but you can also, you also have like the capital efficiency of not having like this, your funds stuck in the L2 for like a long time, between like block proposal and proving. So we hope this allows like very interesting use cases, where like the L1 is still used in kind of like quite a lot of ways. It can still contain most of the liquidity if people want. But yeah, of course, doing stuff on L1 is still expensive, so people should still move most of their funds to L2 themselves. But for example, like a big Uniswap pool could still stay on L1, and then all the trades are actually like batched on L2, and then only like a single swap needs to be done on L1. So kind of like, this whole system kind of like allows moving between chains like very, very seamlessly. So, so there's actually more stuff on Gwyneth, but maybe I should stop now. Maybe that's for other questions as well.
Yeah, no worries. And just curious on that topic of the kind of immediate real-time proving, I'm wondering if there's any sort of trade-offs that are associated with it, with say, like for example, development barriers, any security concerns. So besides all the advantages it offers, are there any limitations or trade-offs that we also need to consider?
Yeah. Unfortunately, yes, because for ZK rollup, I guess the ZK part is kind of like important. And for now, doing real-time proofs, so to be able to do this synchronous composability thing, and actually be able to propose block with the proof themselves in the base setting, you kind of like need very fast proving. So below 12 seconds, Vitalik seems to now define it at like 4 seconds, because it does take some time to kind of like propagate the block as well. So currently we cannot depend on ZK proofs directly for the security of Gwyneth. So we kind of get around that in like 2 ways. So first, we still do multi-proving. So that means that the real-time proofs that we have are like TE based, or kind of like multi-sig, like ABS kind of like based. So for the TE side, we'll have like multiple TE proofs. So we'll aiming for at least SGX, TDX, and Nitro enclaves. So that means that even if like one of the TEs is broken, which, well, seemingly is very, very possible, then our system is still secure, because you don't only have to break SGX to break our system, you also have to break all the other TE proofs. And we'll also have like some kind of like multi-sig or ABS proof. We're not sure yet which one, but so the basic idea is just to have like another kind of like set of like validators, and somehow they also have to sign something and to the correct block hash, and we kind of like also combine that with the TE proofs. So that means that one, you have to, if you want to break the system, you have to break all of the TEs, but also having like this other like a multi-sig kind of way, proof system. That also means that there's like a totally different way of like securing the system. So even if you're like an expert at like breaking TEs, you still have to kind of like go through our kind of like extra validator set. So yeah, we have both these available, and then yeah, all of these need to kind of like pass for a block to be accepted by Gwyneth. And then we'll also have like an extra like security mechanism where there's kind of like this on-chain bounty where if you can prove that either like one proof system is kind of like broken or one proof system is gives like a different result than other proof systems, then you'll be able to directly claim like a bounty in the smart contract. And this will also automatically disable this proving system in kind of like our registry. So it's kind of like a continuous bounty where, sure, you can try to break Gwyneth, but to do that, you need to be able to break all of the proving systems. But instead, if you just break one, then you'll be able to have like the on-chain bounty. And actually, if you disclose it, it will also give you some extra money because just showing that it's possible to break is very valuable, but also telling us how to actually solve this breaking is also very, very valuable. So that's kind of like the other kind of like security system that we have. And because of the system is kind of like not directly related to Gwyneth, we can actually still use like ZK proofs there as well. So because yeah, for that, the real-time proving aspect is not important. You just have to be able to say like, okay, I'm going to use the ZK proving system to prove that one of the TEs is invalid. Yeah, you can just take whatever time you need and then just show it on chain.
I like the aspect of demonstrating each like first the vulnerability is all on chain. Typically, if you're using like Immunify or like a different bug bounty disclosure service, that you would then go through this pipeline. But then demonstrating that a vulnerability on chain, I think it goes a lot, and it aligns with what the vision of Taiko and Gwyneth is. It's like pure. It's on fully on chain, and then it's interesting to see that you're combining different with trusted execution environments as well as I believe you said AVS within there like a essentially a validator set, and where you need to essentially go through two layers of security in order to break that. And then you mentioned a little bit about the that in the purest form, ZK proofs would be used all the way through.
Right.
But in order to do that, you need 4-second proving times, essentially. And so I guess like my question for that, what would you need? What is that the vision that you're developing towards? Like essentially, as soon as that let's say it becomes a reality, the 4-second block times or 4-second proof times become reality. Would the what you're putting in place right now change with this update?
Yeah, for sure. So once ZK real time is possible, and I guess not like cost, the cost is not a factor, or it's kind of like reasonable. Then yeah, we just add the ZK proof to the other proofs that are required. So it's not like if ZK is possible, then suddenly we would stop using TEs or the multisig. No, it would just be an extra proof that is required, because having the other proofs there is still better, because the ZK proof is also not guaranteed to be bug free. And so we also want to still have like the extra guarantees there with the other proofing systems. So yeah, so some people think like, okay, once you have like the ZK proof there, we don't need the other proofs anymore. We just like drop them because ZK is the best and there's like no compromises, which is true. But that means you have to write code that is bug free, and well, we'll see how that happens. But certainly in the next couple of years, yeah, the TE proofs I think will be there to stay, unless really they're like broken and kind of like useless. But yeah, so the other benefit is also for the TE proofs that they are like very cheap to verify on chain. So for ZK proofs, you're still stuck at like, well, if you actually just verify the proof yourself, you're still stuck at like 300,000-ish gas. And for a TE proof, yeah, you can just make the cost like a single ECDSA signature verification. So around like 4,000, 5,000 gas or something. And so having like lots of TE proofs does not actually increase the cost of like the proof verification much. So you can just, whatever TE you have, you basically just want to add it, because like generating a TE proof is basically free. and verifying it is also like very cheap. So you can have like 5 of them, 6 of them, whatever, and it does not actually increase the cost of running your rollup much at all. For ZK proofs, this is quite different because it does cost quite a lot. Well, at this point, I guess still, it will cost like more to generate a proof, at least, even if it's like real time, it will cost more. And then you still have like the on-chain verification cost, which if you don't want to aggregate, because if you have like 3 or 4 ZK proving systems, you don't really want to aggregate them, because if you aggregate them, then your security still depends on like this one aggregated proof. So if that aggregation is broken, then all your ZK proofs are broken as well. So that's not great. So you kind of like have to kind of like verify them independently. So it is quite costly. But yeah, it will be worth it because, well, security is much higher. Oh yeah, and to get back to your like comment about like the on-chain kind of like bug bounty system, like the one thing is also like important is that we don't want to be like in the hot path. Like if somebody breaks the system, we don't want them to have to contact us and then we have to act upon it and then we kind of like disable it, which is well bad for decentralization, I guess, but also like just like slower than it could be. So like just removing us from the equation, and just if you show it on chain that it's broken, then automatically it's disabled in Gwyneth. I think it's kind of like an important kind of like aspect of this design.
Yeah, nice. And really like all the diversity in the kind of prover types that you offer here, and along with being able to decrease the risk associated with some vulnerabilities of just using a single system, but instead having almost like a network of different proving types that you can generate proofs on and require that those proofs be provided. So really like that idea of having a more like comprehensive system. But I was wondering, Brecht, if you could talk a bit about the rationale in choosing these different prover types. So you mentioned like multi-sig AVS, TEs. Within TEs, I think you guys also use SGXs as well, and then potentially as ZK improves in the future, potentially using ZK proofs as well. So I'm wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit more about the rationale in choosing these different proving types. I know you mentioned that TE proofs are generally cheaper, and then ZK provides more benefits on the like security side, but wondering if we could see a bit about like your approach to those design choices that you made.
Yeah, I think it's just like like honestly, it's just like a practical thing. Like there's not that many different proving types available. I think like these are like the main 3 ones, and like having so we currently prove all the blocks with SGX on Taiko as well, and we see that it's like it's very convenient. That's the least you can say about TEs. They are very convenient, and I think it also gives like a pretty good security. So yeah, I think like all considerations are mostly practical, especially with like the time constraints that we have to work in with the Gwyneth now as well. So yeah, if you only have a couple of seconds to generate a proof, and we still want to have like a very cheap rollup as well, then like TEs are like, well, I don't see any alternatives to TEs, except something like a multisig, but then the multisig, well, people running validators do have to get paid somehow, or they're just like a set of like trusted party. So yeah, I think like the combination of them is always like a good idea. So for currently on Taiko, we actually have like something similar as well, where well all blocks are proven with SGX, but we also have like something called like a guardian prover that can still like override kind of like the block hash if something would be broken. And this guardian set is just like a group of like trusted people that are running a node and just inspecting what's happening on that chain. So yeah, for Taiko, we will be enabling like ZK proofs very shortly. So we'll be using SP1 and RISC-0 proofs there. And there, yeah, we kind of like see the estimate of like, well, still quite costly, although like reducing kind of like quite rapidly. But yeah, the latency. So these ZK VMs have not been optimizing directly for like latency. They have been mostly optimizing for cost. And so we see the latency still being kind of like around like half an hour and up to be able to actually get a proof out of them. So yeah, knowing kind of like these things, then well, how Gwyneth is now made is just like practical standing of what is possible now. And obviously, like when Gwyneth actually launches sometime next year, hopefully the ZK costs have been reduced and like the latency has also gotten lower. But it seems unlikely unless with like hardware acceleration that ZK proofs will be able to be generated in 4 seconds. And even with hardware acceleration, like kind of like everything needs to be hard to like inside like probably like one hardware device to actually hit kind of like the 4 second latency. So, well, we'll see when that happens, but I'm looking forward to having the ZK proofs there at least.
Yeah, got it. And just on that topic, for like in the case in the future, if we're able to use ZK proofs for real time proving and like reach that 4 second latency, I'm interested in hearing about your like predictions for if we're able to reach that point. Like any sort of implications that you see, some different use cases that can be developed from it. Just if we're able to reach our ideal case scenario, what sort of applications or use cases do you anticipate seeing and you're personally excited about?
Right. So I think like the ideal case is kind of like what we're aiming for. Well, I guess the current like proving set that we use is kind of like the shortcut to kind of like the ideal case that we'll have when the ZK proofs are also available. So I guess this is kind of like what we're trying to build with Gwyneth. And then the main like kind of benefit is the synchronous composability, not only between L2s, but also with the L1. So there's kind of like a difference between them because the synchronous composability between L2s is kind of like easier to do than with the L1. You could even say like you don't, well, depending on kind of like how you want to define scalability, you don't necessarily need like the real-time proving aspect, I guess, between the L2s because they make some shortcuts. But yeah, for the L1, you cannot avoid having the proofs there. Yeah, you need like the real-time proving. And so, yeah, a lot of different applications possible, I think. I'm not like an applications guy, so I'm not directly saying like, okay, this kind of like will be possible, this will be possible. But yeah, one of the biggest benefits is that it actually like scales Ethereum without many limitations, I would say. So because you kind of like seamlessly now can go between chains, including the L1, that means like scaling can become like very how to say simple, I guess, or like straightforward. So you don't have to have like kind of all the like infrastructure around it, like bridging and kind of like these things. Because if you can just go between chains, then like the main vision, I guess, also like Gwyneth is to kind of like make something that looks like a single chain. So people don't have to worry on like which rollup there are, kind of like what applications are available. They are just on Ethereum and they just interact with applications on Ethereum. And it doesn't really matter where those applications are. And it also shouldn't be like as complicated to have like routers and kind of like all these kind of like things to kind of like go between all these rollups. So I think the biggest thing that I see is just on the scalability factor where applications will be able to just use like lots of L2s or like they will be able to be stored on all the L2s. And users still have like a great experience because they don't have to care about where the application really is. And so maybe that's also like a good point where I can like fill some of the Gwyneth specific thing. So for Gwyneth, you will actually be able to kind of like immediately access the L1 state as well. So for example, now if you make a roll up, then this roll up has like a clean slate, like it starts from scratch. There's nothing to do. People actually have to deploy smart contracts to the L2 to be able to do anything. And then obviously liquidity needs to come and stuff like that. So for Gwyneth, like the cool thing is that automatically every smart contract that's deployed on L1 is also directly available to Gwyneth L2s because we have direct access to the L1 state. So that means that if, for example, Uniswap is deployed on L1, people could actually use Uniswap directly on L2 as well, even without kind of like the synchronous composability with the L1. So there's like two ways that Uniswap could be used on Gwyneth. So one is kind of like the batching stuff. So you actually batch swaps on L2, and then you still do like one big swap on L1, and then all the liquidity stays on L1. But the other thing is, keeping stuff on L1 is great sometimes, but it's obviously more expensive than doing everything just on L2. So the other thing that's possible is just to use the smart contract code deployed on L1, and you just use the same code on L2, but you keep all the state on L2. And that means that you can have like natively deployed applications on the L2 without actually having to do any deployment, and it just working out of the box, just by, well, just like how Gwyneth works. So that gives you like the cheapest cost, and also developers don't have to kind of like maintain the application on all the different L2s. They are basically there directly when they are deployed on L1. So if there needs to be like updates and stuff, they don't have to kind of like maintain all of these. So I think that's pretty cool. And also just allows for much easier scalability, because now if you want to scale your application between all these L2s, you kind of like have to deploy them there. You just have to like know where to go. And if you want to have like extra scalability, then okay, there needs to be like an extra L2 deployed. You have to deploy all your applications there, that kind of like stuff. And so for Gwyneth, that won't be necessary. Like developers just have to deploy like once to the L1. And then when like more scalability is necessary, you can just add more L2s where transactions can happen, where some extra state can be stored if necessary, and it just like kind of like works out of the box. So the only thing you really have to do to increase scalability is just say like, okay, deploy new L2, and then users can immediately use that extra block space to do extra stuff.
Yeah, got it. And really love the vision also that you mentioned of making users feel like they're on a single chain. So applications, you can just use lots of L2s and then users can still have a good experience from there. I think that really helps address that fragmentation issue that we have. But just on that topic of fragmentation, I'm wondering if you could speak about what the main challenges are with current solutions that are trying to address fragmentation in this space, like specifically like fragmentation and rollups. And maybe you could also speak about how based rollups kind of address these challenges.
Right. So yeah, I guess, I guess, yeah, I guess like two aspects, I guess, to the fragmentation aspect. So one is kind of like, yeah, that the rollups are kind of like isolated, like islands, and you have to go through like the bridging process to kind of like join one, and then you have like, well, optimistic rollups, the 7 days delay, unless you kind of like use like a liquidity provider that can directly provide your funds on the other chain. So that gives you like, yeah, I guess pretty, well, I guess the experience could be good if you use liquidity providers, but then it's still like capital inefficient and I guess more expensive than it could be. And yeah, so again, also like, yeah, if an application is not deployed on, for example, Optimism, then yeah, you simply cannot use the like a, you can't keep your funds on Optimism and kind of like use this application. You kind of like have to withdraw somewhere else, kind of like use the application. So not a great experience. And I guess the other important thing is, yeah, I guess the centralized sequencers. So even if there could be like a technical solution to go between rollups in kind of like a seamless way. So even if you have like all the good synchronous composability, all the real-time proving, whatever, all the good stuff, then if all rollups are kind of like have their own centralized sequencer, then that means that they cannot easily work together well, or there's like no guarantee that they actually can work together well. So that's kind of like where a shared sequencer comes in. And yeah, obviously at Taiko and Gwyneth, we are strong believers of just using the L1 validators as the shared sequencer. So yeah, the idea is basically to do multiple transactions on multiple chains at the same time. And then you can theoretically kind of like seamlessly go between the rollups. But yeah, so as people that try to make things as decentralized as possible, and also just, I think, a technical inevitability, because using base sequencing gives you this very good shared sequencer, and it's also like a very simple way to do it, as in all the infrastructure is kind of already in place, so you can just reuse kind of like the existing like PBS mechanism to kind of like build blocks in this system. Well, with some caveats there, but yeah, the infrastructure is there, and you can just make use of it in a based rollup. So it is kind of like ideal from my perspective. because then it's kind of like a shared infrastructure between the L1 and L2, and you get obviously like all the liveness and kind of like the permissionless nature of kind of like the validators that are able to propose your blocks. So you have like the interconnectivity there, and then one big important thing there as well is only based rollups can kind of like offer this kind of like synchronous composability with the L1. So if you have like a shared sequencer which is not also the L1 proposer, then you cannot just seamlessly build L1 plus L2 blocks kind of like in kind of like one unified way. I think that's the other biggest benefit of being based, being like having like one shared sequencer which is kind of like neutral and doesn't have like its own separate set of validators, which for me is not ideal and technically doesn't make much sense if you already have the L1 validators that could do the same thing. The caveat there is also that, for like a normal based rollup, the existing infrastructure is enough, so you can just use PBS. And for a normal based rollup, this is exactly what you need to be able to make an efficient rollup. The complications there are like if you actually do want to do synchronous composability with the L1, or you are not happy with 12 seconds finalization. I guess we haven't talked about pre-confirmation yet, but I'll leave that for another question. So if you want to do like more complex stuff, then just like each L1 block like 12 seconds, and you want to do like more unified building, then you do need to have some extra functionality on the L1 that is currently not available. But the good thing is that this infrastructure is being built because there's like a big push for pre-confirmations. So L1 proposers will be able to kind of like handle these new use cases pretty easily.
Oh, I see. And just on that topic for pre-confirmations, I'm wondering if you could talk about how base rollups offer those pre-confirmations to users, and maybe if you could also talk about the different types of pre-confirmations, and then also their like associated guarantees that are attached there. Just wondering like how those are enabled specifically with base rollups.
Okay. So the normal based rollups just use like PBS to kind of like get the proposed transaction into the L1 block. So it doesn't really matter who is kind of like building the block. So any builder, L2 builder, can just listen to the mempool, pick up whatever L2 transactions, and then they kind of like bundle those up, make like an L1 transaction, and try to get their L1 transaction be the first L2 proposed transaction, because otherwise somebody can front run them and then they can't actually predict how much money they'll make. So that's kind of like the thing. So there could be like multiple L2 builders in parallel, and they would all be competing with each other to kind of like be the first one to kind of like do the proposed block call on the smart contract. So without PBS, there would be like multiple of these transactions in the mempool, and only one would basically succeed, and the other one would waste gas, kind of like trying to get in. The block could still be valid, but if they execute on a different state than expected, then there will be like many like invalid transactions, or like the fee payment will be different than expected, and then the actual L2 proposer, builder, whatever, will make less money than expected, which means he will not be profitable. So it's kind of like a bad situation to be in. But luckily, PBS can like solve that, because these multiple builders could be building blocks in parallel, and then you can just submit their L1 transaction to like an L1 builder directly with like revert protection, where they say like, oh, I want to be like the first proposed transaction. If I'm not, then just drop my transaction without wasting any gas, and then only like one wins, and then kind of like the system is still like very efficient. The downside of the system is this directly depends on like the L1 block building, and L1 block building only happens every 12 seconds. So there is simply no guarantee which L2 builder will win. So you don't know when your transaction will actually be included in the L1. Because it's just based on chance and like how much the L2 builder kind of like pays to get included. So that's kind of like the user experience limitation of current based rollups. So then Justin Drake come up with like a way to actually do pre-confirmations in a base setting, because then if you have like a centralized sequencer, then it's kind of like pretty simple. So you simply kind of like submit your transaction to the centralized sequencer, and then the centralized sequencer will just say like, okay, I promise I will include your transaction at some point in the future, and you just kind of like trust this centralized sequencer. For a base rollup, we don't have any trusted kind of like entities, so this does not work. And like all these builders are trying to kind of like build blocks in general, so you don't know which one will. So there's like some non-deterministic aspect there. So how pre-confirmations in like a base setting work is that you basically, well, it's kind of like the simplest way to explain it is basically that the L1 proposer, like the L1 proposer is always like just like one chosen by Ethereum to propose the L1 block. And so you do away with the non-deterministic nature by saying like, okay, this selected L1 proposer also can give you guarantees on what will be included in his L1 block. And so if you can just go through, so this L1 proposer is basically like the centralized sequencer for like 12 seconds. And so if you just see it as that, it's kind of like this is the trusted party where you want to connect to and get your pre-confirmation from. So as long as this guy kind of like promises, yeah, I'm going to include your transaction, then it will actually be, he can actually guarantee it because he's making the L1 block. And so basically the centralized sequencer kind of like changes every 12 seconds, which makes it decentralized. But also to make it like trustless, because you don't actually know this L1 proposer. It could be anybody, so you can't trust this person to actually give you any guarantees without some kind of punishment if he doesn't deliver on his promises. So these L1 proposers kind of like have to opt in to say like, okay, I want to give pre-confirmations. To be able to give pre-confirmation, I'm gonna stake this extra amount of my money. And if I give you a promise of I'm going to include your transaction and this L1 proposer doesn't do it, then you can just prove it in a smart contract that says like, okay, this pre-confirmation guy did not actually fulfill his promise. He's going to get slashed. And so that way there's like a pretty good guarantee, or like a very good guarantee that actually these promises are kept without any trust assumptions. So this kind of like pre-confirmation infrastructure is mostly on the L1 side. And so if you're like an L2, then you kind of like, you also give like extra like pre-confirmation on the L2 side, but you kind of like bundle them up. So it actually turns into like one L1 transaction. And then this L1 transaction is kind of like what gets pre-confirmed by the L1 property. And so, you have like two types of like pre-confirmations. You have like inclusion pre-confirmations and execution pre-confirmations. So inclusion pre-confirmations are like the simplest one. Where you just have like guarantees that if you do a transaction, then it will be included somewhere in the block. So you just have like, okay, my transaction will be included. That's all you need. And for some transactions, it is still useful. So if you, for example, do like a transfer, then it doesn't really matter where your transaction is done in the block because it doesn't really contain, like it doesn't depend on any kind of like pre-existing state. You know you have like 2 ETH, and if you want to transfer that 2 ETH out, then it just needs to happen. It doesn't matter kind of like where it's included in the block. But for most things, if you do like smart contract interactions, for example, you do like a Uniswap trade, then the position in the block does matter because the Uniswap pool state could change depending on where your transaction is included, and so also get kind of like how much you actually pay and get in return. So to be able to have some guarantees directly for these as well, you have like execution pre-confirmations, which basically means that your transaction will be included in some kind of like expected place. And so so if you only do like inclusion pre-conf for like Uniswap trades, then it's still kind of like a mystery how much you will actually get in return. So also not like not the best user experience. But the execution pre-confs, you can say like, okay, I'm gonna do a Uniswap trade, and like after 200 milliseconds, a second, whatever, you actually directly get back of like, okay, this is how much my trade actually. How my trade will actually execute in the future. And if that's broken, then it would get slashed.
Got it. And just on the topic for like the general infrastructure, I'm wondering if you could also talk about the like an overview of the architecture for base rollups as well, and the approach that Gwyneth took. So, I mean, I'd imagine like similar to our standard rollups, there's like the settlement, execution layers, data availability, just things like that. I'm wondering if you could walk us through the architecture for base rollups, how that compares to our any standard centralized rollups, and maybe some of the approaches or like specific considerations that Gwyneth took.
Right. So yeah, I think like I talked like a little bit before about like how the normal base rollup works in like a PBS setting. So yeah, just going on that is yeah, it does have like some extra limitations. So for example, um, I guess the cost factor, right? So you have like a couple of decisions, so you can post like your data availability on Ethereum, and you also want to use, especially now, you kind of like want to use blob space as much as possible. So what rollups in like rollups with like a centralized sequencer can easily do is kind of like optimize for costs, because they don't have kind of like these 12 seconds where every time somebody else can come in and kind of like submit a block. And that means that the block you're building is kind of like useless now, because you kind of like have to build on top of a new state. And so the way to kind of like optimize kind of like block submission is not so easy in a base setting compared to like a centralized sequencer, because the centralized sequencer can just like batch transactions as much as possible, and then when they have like a full block, or they can make like full blobs, like I put like transactions in like full blobs, only then they can decide like, okay, I'm gonna actually submit this to the L1. And so they can kind of like easily optimize the L1 propose process, which is great because that obviously reduces costs. And because they have like these kind of like trust-based pre-confirmations, like the actual like L1 submission is not very important. It's just mostly kind of like a bookkeeping thing where, okay, I'm gonna do this every couple of minutes, even like half an hour or something. So yeah, they are able to easily provide good user experience with low costs because of kind of like how that works. For base systems, yeah, like I said, it's totally different, because there's no single entity that can just like batch transactions up as much as possible to then submit at a later time. And so the efficiency of the system, especially for like a normal base rollup, is definitely lower, because anytime a block is profitable, somebody would actually want to propose a block, even if it's kind of like inefficient use of L1 block space, just because, yeah, if you don't make the profitable block, somebody else will. And so, yeah, you kind of like, you don't have a choice but to actually do it. And so this is also something where pre-confirmations can help, because for pre-confirmations, we already kind of like select kind of like this centralized sequencer for like a limited amount of time. And so if we simply allow either this one pre-confirm to have like a reasonable, like for example, instead of like 12 seconds, we just give this kind of like pre-confirm the right to propose block for like a minute or something, then already this pre-confirm can kind of like aggregate, like collect all these kind of like transactions, and then make like a pretty efficient a block out of it. Because yeah, only this one pre-confirm would be able to submit blocks, by the way. So that's kind of like no non-deterministic behavior. So that's kind of like one way to do it, but then this one pre-confirm has kind of like the monopoly over the L2 block space for quite a long time. So it's kind of like not ideal, because then that does get kind of closer to kind of like centralized sequencer territory, even though it's kind of like more limited. But yeah, the ideal case would be that these pre-confirmations would be pre-confers, so they would still like switch out very quickly, like, well, ideally every L1 block. But ideally they would be able to kind of like work together to kind of like chain their kind of like work in kind of like an off-chain way, where you still have kind of like the similar mechanism where you batch as much as possible and only submit when actually necessary. But yeah, that's kind of like, that will depend on like the pre-confirms themselves, because I guess it's up to them to kind of like say when they actually want to do the proposed transaction. And also, if they gave a promise for a pre-confirmation, then they have to be 100% sure that that promise will be kept by the next pre-confirm, because otherwise they would actually get slashed for not fulfilling the pre-confirm. So yeah, there's some nuances and some difficulties there. And so definitely, just giving the pre-comfort kind of like a longer time frame to kind of like build blocks is definitely kind of like the easiest way to do it. But yeah, also not ideal from like the decentralization kind of like aspect.
Just also for clarification, you mentioned that there's transaction inclusion pre-confirmations, but also uh, transaction execution pre-confirmation. I guess like what would be would I guess the transaction execution pre-confirmation be more difficult to confirm? Why not just do transaction inclusion or sorry, transaction execution pre-confirmation, maybe like a commitment saying that um, I am going to order these transactions in this way. Would that be um, would that be a bit more inefficient or in that way? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think like with the inclusion only is that if you just get the inclusion pre-comps, then whoever's building the block still has kind of like a lot of freedom to kind of like order transactions in like the most efficient way. So for example, now in PBS, if you kind of like do transactions, then like block builders will try to like have like lots of like variations on like what will actually make the most profitable block. And so if like another transaction comes in, like you get your pre-confirmation at like second one, and then there's like still like lots of other transactions that are coming in, and then some kind of like very valuable transaction comes in at like second 8 or something that needs to be at the top of the block. Then if you just get the inclusion pre-comp, then the builder still has like the freedom to actually kind of like reorganize the transaction in this more profitable way. So it's kind of like a more low risk for builders to actually give you this. And then like an execution pre-comp, which already kind of like says like, it will execute this way. And then they might lose money if like kind of like another transaction comes in that would make their block more valuable, but they lost out because they gave you this execution pre-comp already, which they have to keep or risk getting slashed. And so I guess that's also where like the slashing amount is very important, because if the amount that gets slashed is only if it would be like 1 ETH, but the extra value to be made is kind of like 10 ETH, then obviously the common sense thing for the builder to do is to break the promise and make the more profitable block. So
Yeah, I think that happened with Cow Swap at one point where they matching orders and essentially someone extracted MEV and then they were subsequently kicked out and then their slashed
yeah.
amount was
Well,
essentially distributed. And interesting. So in this case, like there's varying levels of risk for this. So the transaction inclusion would be less risky than the transaction execution. So as a result, the premiums might be different, or like the
nope.
cost for the
Seems
transaction.
like he dropped off.
Oh,
Oh,
oh, did I cut out just now?
Oh, yeah,
Sorry
you
about
cut
that.
off. Can you repeat it?
Sorry about that. Yeah. So essentially, the transaction inclusion is less risky than the transaction execution pre-confirmation, and as a result, they're priced differently from each other in this mechanism.
Yeah, I guess it's all speculation at this moment, like how the pricing will actually work, and if if the L2 builder or L1 proposer, whatever, who actually want to give you this kind of like run the risk of actually losing out on kind of like any profit to be made. So yeah, there's some different designs around this, some different ideas how it could play out. But I think we'll probably want to like see what actually happens on mainnet, because it's very hard to predict. But yeah, the pricing aspect is definitely one of the more interesting aspects of like unknowns about like pre-comps. Next to just like people actually running, because to be able even to give these pre-confirmations, you have to kind of like run this extra like sidecar next to your L1 validator. So yeah, people have to both opt in and then actually still give you these pre-confirmations for some tip. So we'll have to see how that goes.
Got it. And thank you for explaining the nuances between them for both like the inclusion and execution pre-comps. Didn't really see that there were so many like implications behind both. So thank you for that explanation. Wondering just on the application side, what kinds of like apps can ideal apps can be extended with Gwyneth, and can you also talk about the value proposition that's provided to them for using like Gwyneth, the base rollup? So, for example, maybe some applications with like lending that are lending protocol based or governance platforms. I'm wondering if you could talk about some applications that have that value proposition to use Gwyneth.
So I think like the ideal case for us, for Gwyneth, because it's like easy to add like block space to the network, is kind of like application that automatically can scale easily. Like I guess like very parallelizable applications. Because if it's like very parallelizable, then that means that transaction can actually easily move between these L2s, and it doesn't really matter where you kind of like execute these transactions. You just need to have like block space, and then the state kind of like can also be like stored between these L2s easily. So those are the ideal cases, because that's kind of like, yeah, for scalability, you need parallelization, I guess, because either you can like optimize for the performance of like a single node, which always has like limitations. So to be able to actually scale, like for an application to actually scale, you need to have like some parallelization going on. And so that's actually exactly kind of like what Gwyneth gives you. But yeah, even if something does not scale, like parallelize as well, for example, like the common example that we always give is kind of like, yeah, Uniswap scales very well if you can scale the pools, but like a single pool is either much more difficult to kind of like scale, because there's like a single kind of like lock on kind of like the current kind of like swap price. So all the swaps that are done on a single pool do have to go through like some kind of like fixed sequence. And yeah, this state needs to be stored on somewhere, right? So this kind of like just like the state of kind of like the current balance of the two tokens. Yeah, it's kind of like something you cannot easily kind of like parallelize unless you kind of like split the pool. But then there's like two prices, and then there's like, yeah, you kind of like have to keep the two in balance. So it's not an ideal case. But yeah, so to actually scale on the pool level, you kind of like have to come up with kind of like a new kind of like way of kind of like, yeah, being able to kind of like parallelize things. So that's definitely kind of like more difficult to do, and I think like any kind of like scalability setting. So it's not, I think, like Gwyneth related. It's just like inherently these things are not scalable because they just depend on like one single kind of like state that needs to be shared somehow between everything. And so yeah, the ideal case is where like the parallelization is kind of like limitless because of like how the application works. So yeah, either lots of different pools that can kind of like independently store their state, or like something like token transfers, for example, where yeah, you can easily move between all the different chains just by doing like a transfer. So at most you kind of like touch two chains that need to kind of like sync, but otherwise all the other transfers can happen in parallel. So I forgot, what was the other question related to this?
Oh, no, I think you answered it perfectly. So ideally, those
Okay.
parallelizable applications. Okay, got
Right,
it.
right.
Yeah. Yeah, and just wondering, just scoping out a bit onto like the vision aspects. So you talked a little bit about how you see ZK playing out in a few years. I'm wondering if you could also talk about what the Ethereum endgame means for you. So especially with like the rollup centric roadmap that we have, what are some of the main challenges that exist right now? And you talked a little bit about how base rollups may go about with addressing those challenges, but also curious to hear about what you see as kind of the end goal with Ethereum and what kind of steps we need to get to that end goal as well.
Oh, detailed roadmap. So I think like I think every time. So I think like L2s I think like are moving more closely to kind of like how they ideally should work, as in things like being like very independent, like roll-ups with their own like very complex kind of like smart contracts and stuff. I think like for Gwyneth, the smart contract will be already like much simpler to do, but still we kind of like have the proving and verification thing that we have to take into account. So I think like ideally we move into something like where L2s are like very simple, and then kind of like the actual like verification of the rollup itself is kind of like built into the Ethereum protocol. So that's also like what Vitalik kind of like proposed with like this what we call it again, ZK EVM kind of like precompile. So if you even don't have to kind of like verify your rollup inside a smart contract, then even kind of like all the kind of like proof verification stuff kind of like falls away. And then if on the proposing side, so how blocks are proposed, if you also reuse the kind of like Ethereum infrastructure, like base rollups do, then like all the complexity with like how blocks are proposed and like kind of like selecting like a sequencer or whatever also kind of like falls away. And then if you use Ethereum just as the data availability layer as well, then you also don't have like a separate system for that. And so you just also use whatever is available there. And yeah, if you can make a system like that, then the rollup really gets like very easy and very easy to also kind of like deploy and like add other rollups as well to increase the scalability. So I think, yeah, if you have this, and then obviously Ethereum itself will not want to depend on TEs or any kind of like other separate like validator set for like the verification. So that will have to have real-time ZK proving, I think, to actually work out and to actually get adopted by the L1. So yeah, I think hopefully what Gwyneth is doing is moving towards this direction and will help kind of like get this kind of get adopted. But yeah, I think like the real-time ZK proving will be kind of like necessary to be able to do it. Then I guess there's also this discussion about like how to actually do kind of like pre-confirmations, because yeah, just the normal based rollup, yeah, but the 12-second block times is not good enough. So then it's like, how do you do pre-confirmations? And then the discussion is also like, yeah, does this need to be built into Ethereum as well, just by using like faster block times, or is kind of like this sidecar way of doing things still like good enough? But if you do the sidecar way of doing doing pre-confirmations, then this also adds complexity on the smart contract level, where you do still have to have like some kind of like extra mechanism where people can stake, you can get slash, that kind of like stuff. So yeah, if you move that stuff into Ethereum as well, it's simply like faster block times, and then you have block times at like 2-3 seconds, which is hopefully good enough. Maybe not always, but we'll have to see about that. Then everything we're kind of like building now will be built into Ethereum, and that would be great to see. And also, I think would be, I guess, what people call the end game, or until we come up with new problems, or like imagine new problems, and then we have to solve them. And that's always cool.
Yeah, I'm really excited for us to reach that stage. But just as a last question before we end today's session, I'm wondering, Brecht, if there's any closing thoughts you have or any announcements you'd like to make on your end.
So yeah, we're like on the Taiko side. Yeah, hopefully we'll actually have like ZK proofs enabled in like a month or something. So it's a long time coming, because yeah, for now we still have like only SGX proofs. So yeah, we'll have at least ZK proofs as kind of like a fraud proving mechanism. Should be next month, I believe, and that should be live. And then we'll kind of like gradually ramp up kind of like the proving coverage until we're at like a 100 blocks proven with like ZK. But that might take like a couple of months. Well, we'll have to see about that, because the concern there is that yeah, cost is kind of like still pretty high, and we also have to add some extra functionality, kind of like aggregate the proofs to kind of like lower the costs. So that's I think the exciting stuff coming for Taiko. Oh, next to obviously also the pre-confirmations. So yeah, we're working together with this large group of projects as well to kind of like bring pre-confirmations to mainnet. Hopefully all the infrastructure is in place around like DEFCON, and then hopefully we can get it on mainnet as soon as possible, because yeah, that's also like very important for Taiko, not only for like user experience, but also from the cost perspective. Will be amazing to see. And yeah, also like just like the speed in which this actually has happened, from like ID to like lots of like this whole kind of like ecosystem growing around like pre-confirmation. Yeah, it's like very, very cool to see. On the Gwyneth side, yeah, we're still like actively now in development. So we're actually trying to make like this so get everything in place so we can actually do the cross-chain calls and the kind of like cross-chain block building and getting like a node up and running. So hopefully that will be done end of this year, and we actually have like a testnet to then launch sometime in 2025, as soon as possible. But yeah, that's the goal. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, so lots of new developments coming in for both the Taiko and Gwyneth side. Very excited for that.
Yep.
So gonna have a very busy couple of next few months.
Yep.
But yeah, really enjoyed hearing about all your thoughts today, Brecht, about like the vision of synchronized composability, value prop with like real-time proving, and then the multi-proof approach as well, and then your discussion about the nuances with the pre-confirmation. So really insightful to hear all of that. But thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thanks. It was a pleasure to join. Had a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you so much.